Yakub Ismail, the policing commander for the east area of the city of Leicester. Today on this important talk show, I have got for me a very important person and guest. His name is Knnop. I will give him a few minutes just now to introduce himself and tell you what he does. But firstly, I just wanted to wish you all a belated Eid Mubarak. I know this is the Hajj period, and for our Muslim communities, this is a very sacred and holy time. I'm hoping that, in the current climate, you've all had the opportunity to spend valuable time with your families and had blessed days. Thank you to Radio Hajj 87.9 FM for inviting us on, to give us this opportunity to talk to you about so many things. I've jotted down a list: community cohesion, what my priorities are. Prevent is one of the things that maybe we can talk about, and my approach to serious violence and knife crime. But before we go into all of those things, and Neighbourhood Link and Neighbourhood Active and the things that we do on the east of Leicester, I'm going to introduce you to my guest, Knnop. Hi, Will.
Hi, Yakub, and thanks very much to yourself and to Radio Hajj for inviting me along today. So some of you will remember me as the old Inspector at Spinney Hill, doing the job that you do, and congratulations for getting that.
Thank you.
It's a great role. For the last 5 years or so, I've been the Regional Prevent Coordinator for the East Midlands. Actually retired as a police officer last year, but I've gone back to my old job effectively as a civilian.
In a nutshell, that's Knnop, but it should be a household name to most of you. As you had just heard, he was the former MPA commander. So before I took over, a couple of years or a few years before, he was in the position that I'm in now. So a lot of what we have in place, the trust and the relationships that we have, with our communities, isn't a new thing from today. These are the relationships that Bill and his team built, over the years. We talk about community cohesion, and that's one of the things that, on my list to talk about. And I could bore you all with the academic or the United Nations definition of community cohesion. But in a nutshell, what is community cohesion? It's where, communities of all cultures, of all faiths, or non-faiths come together and take care of one another. That is what community cohesion in a nutshell is. And we saw now in the current COVID restrictions, or last year, communities of different groups and cultures came together, and they really took care of one another in the best ways, by providing food for one another, by talking to one another, talking about mental health and welfare. And I saw community cohesions in abundance, not just in Leicester, East Leicester, but across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So, I'm really proud to be the commander of an area where, I see the communities coming together in the most difficult times. But Bill, you mentioned that you are currently the regional coordinator or director for Prevent. And I have been asked this before, but I think you'd be the best person to tell our viewers or listeners what actually is Prevent. What is it you do, Bill?
Okay. Well, I'm going to strip it back to basics.
Yeah.
I'm not going to assume anything. So the government has had a counter-terrorist strategy now for nearly 20 years. It's called a contest strategy, and that includes 4 Ps, as we refer to them. The first is pursue, probably the easiest to understand. That's the criminal investigation of terrorist offences.
Yeah.
And then there's 2 which are always considered together: protect and prepare. Protect is how do we make our society, our institutions, our buildings more secure against terrorist attacks, and that's all the bollards you've seen go up in recent years around airports and city centres, etc. And then there is prepare, about how do you actually get back to normal after a terrorist attack takes place. So those first 3 are, I think everybody's completely signed up to them. They understand them. The last P, prevent, is what I work in, and is by far the most contentious area of policing that I've worked in 30 years plus now. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because it's massively misunderstood. Yeah. I'm thinking of a little diagram, unfortunately not going to really work on radio, which is a pyramid that describes to me and my team what Prevent is. And the first layer is the messaging, the projects that build up community cohesion, that try and effectively undermine the message of extremists. And that a lot of that is done by government departments as well as community groups that receive funding, that seek to provide, positive pro-social activities for people to get involved in to undermine the message of the extremists. The middle section of that pyramid is safeguarding.
Yeah.
And that is how do we divert and protect vulnerable people from getting drawn into terrorism or supporting terrorism.
Yeah.
And that is the bulk of what my team do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So working with colleagues in the council, NHS and education are the main partners that we work with. What packages of support, what incentives can we put together for people who've been identified as having a vulnerability to getting drawn into supporting terrorism effectively.
Yeah.
And there is a panel called Channel, which puts together these packages of support.
Yeah.
And we work with people sometimes just for a matter of weeks, sometimes for months, and on occasions for years as we track them through their the various stages of risk that they present.
Yeah.
And the very tip end of that pyramid is working to rehabilitate people who have been convicted of terrorist offences. So there is also a small team that works with people as they come out from prison and helps them reintegrate into society. So that in a nutshell is what Prevent is doing. But I am well aware from my previous role, sat in your chair that you're in now, as well as my experiences early on in Prevent, that it is often misconstrued as spying on communities. Yeah. It gets confused with Schedule 7, the stops at airports that people have a real issue with. Confused with clumsy statements that are made by government ministers and things like that. But at its heart, it is about trying to divert people away from getting drawn into criminal behaviour before they tip over into that. Yeah. And I think most of us, when we think, is it better to turn the tap off and divert people before they get drawn in that way, would agree that that's what we should be doing. The argument is how we do it. Yeah. And what I will never fall out with anybody is if they come to me with good ideas about what we should be doing. Yeah. Because this is still a relatively new strategy. It's been a statutory, so a legal obligation since 2015, so it's only 6 years old. Yeah. And it is evolving. There's currently a review taking place that is going around the country, getting feedback from practitioners, communities about how we can make it better, because we definitely need to evolve. So at the start of this process, it was very much fixed on what I try and refer to as Al-Qaeda and ISIS inspired terrorism. Yeah. You'll see an official material of Islamist. It's a term that I recognise is contentious in its use, so I try and refer to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Yeah. But you will see official material that refers to the term Islamist. Yeah. So it was very much fixed on that because that was the biggest threat facing the UK. Yeah. We have seen a big growth, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, and people will have seen it in media reporting, in the number of far-right referrals that are made to us. Yeah. And in fact, I've lost count of the number of groups that have been prescribed, so made illegal by the Home Secretary. Yeah. But we must be into 5 or 6 groups now that have been prohibited, prescribed by the Home Secretary. Mm-hmm. So that's, we see nationally pretty much parity between Al-Qaeda and ISIS referrals and referrals made from far right. Yeah. And if, you sat in a channel panel today, you would see it just as likely that we would be talking around a young person who is coming out with, very strongly right-wing, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic rhetoric that we're looking to. I
mean, thanks for bringing that in, Bill. And I just want to remind our listeners, the offer is there from Bill. He's prepared to listen to how, things can be made better, how, we can work together. There's a fantastic opportunity here to ask, Bill any questions. But Bill, you talked about far right and you talk about Islamist and Al-Qaeda, but Prevent, what is its remit? Is it solely around right wing and Islamist or Al-Qaeda related, or is it open to any form of extremism? So who do you work with? Who can be referred into you?
Okay, so the first thing is that people don't come with handy labels on them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time we're just asking people to pick up the phone and talk to us and discuss their concerns with them. Yeah. So the bulk of referrals where there is an identified ideology, it is Al-Qaeda, ISIS or right wing. Yeah. We have a lot of referrals made to us where actually when we look at it, we just have an angry, confused kid there. I'm saying kid, it could be an adult, but we have lots of young people referred to us.
Yeah.
And when we try and unpick it, we actually think there's a different issue going on there.
Yeah.
There could be, an unhealthy influence from an older sibling. There could be domestic violence going on at home. There could be substance abuse. And actually or there may be bullying at school. And when we actually look at that issue and get some support around that, then actually we think there's not a role here for prevent. That can be dealt with adequately by the school, by mental health professionals, etc. So there is a big basket of stuff that we look at and we think that's just not appropriate for us, because we don't want to be interfering with people's rights of expression, with people's own political views. That's not the remit or certainly not religious views. That's not the remit for prevent.
Thank you. I'm just looking up at the screen. I've noticed some questions or texts have started coming in. There's one or two appearing on my phone as well. Question for you on the screen, Bill, from a texter. I have on 2 occasions tried to contact Police 101 to inform of incidents of community concerns. Unfortunately, I held online for 35 minutes but got no results. Can we have a system there where one can be called back to ask what the caller's concerns were and if there is still assistance required? I personally feel it's a waste of time. Now, to our texter, I'm not so sure that's a question for Bill, but I have taken your feedback on board, and that is something that I will feed into our contact management center. I understand that they try and answer 101 calls within a certain period, whether it's amount of seconds or minutes, and 999s have to be answered within so many seconds. So I've taken that on board, and I will pass that feedback in. But what I would suggest is that you can also report stuff online. So if you're not having any joy on the phone, for whatever reason, sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's staffing, or sometimes they're running a major incident, which should be no excuse for why you shouldn't speak to somebody, but feel free to use the online platform where you can send your message in. But then also through your local neighborhood team, feel free to contact local neighborhood officers, especially using something called Neighborhood Link. Obviously, if it's urgent, dial 999. Another question on there for you, Bill, and this is somebody who's texted in. Some of us are really confused. Tell us what is prevent and how we as a community can work with you to make all our communities safe. That's question 1. Okay. And then there's question 2 on there. Some would say prevent disproportionately targets Muslim people. Can we have your thoughts on that? I'll let you pick those 2 questions and answer that.
Okay, well, the first one, I think I've kind of talked around what prevent is, but definitely about how you can work with us. So every year there are opportunities to apply for funding. So Leicester is lucky, it gets quite a lot of funding from the Home Office for prevent projects. Mm-hmm. And these are typically outreach, engagement, positive events that we can either have extra youth workers out on the streets that are engaging with people, trying to pick up sentiment, address grievances, or putting on positive activities that people can be directed to. And then there are particular almost therapeutic projects to actually work with people who are identified as being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And then we also are always looking for mentors for Channel. So we have a cadre, so a group of ideological, theological mentors across the spectrum that we can access, who can then support young people, vulnerable people through the Channel process. Mm-hmm. And for me, those people are the absolute unsung heroes of Channel. They work with some really difficult, challenging people, some people who are really quite damaged. Mm-hmm. They take them under the wing, they give them an alternative view, they give them some life skills, and take them really on a journey back towards being a more included member of society, effectively, somebody who doesn't feel like they're on the margins, and their only way to pursue a grievance is through violence. So I would say they're the most obvious ways to. So either as part of a group bidding for funding, or if you think you've got those skills around mentoring, please get in touch with the team and we'll talk to you about that process. Okay.
And the second part of the question was about Muslim people feeling targeted. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm really glad that question's come in. Because it is a theme. It's one that's expressed. I mean, what we have to acknowledge is that for the last 20 years or so, the biggest threat from terrorism has been coming from first Al Qaeda and then ISIS. Yeah. So we should not be surprised that we are getting vulnerable people referred to us who have been in contact with material either from Al-Qaeda or ISIS. ISIS in particular has been really effective as a communicator.
Yeah.
It has done what big businesses do. It segments their audience. It has produced material for adults who might be theologically sound and talking around the caliphate and the importance of what they're doing. It's produced material for young women who maybe have romantic aspirations. It's produced material that have fed violent male fantasies, and then that's very much what the media have picked up on. So we should not be surprised that we get vulnerable young Muslim children and vulnerable adults referred to us because they've been targeted by extremists. We should not be surprised by that.
Now, a lot of parents will be driving home, listening in their cars, or people will be at home listening to what you've just said, that, some groups may target their children or the vulnerable in virtual spaces.
Yeah.
How do those parents get in touch with Prevent? Is it through the schools, GPs, from the horse's mouth directly? How can parents who are concerned about a behavior reach in? And what would you do with those families to support them?
Okay, well, the biggest risk facing our communities at the moment is what is material is online. And that material cuts across all ideologies.
Yeah.
So the far right have learnt the lessons that particularly ISIS have learned better than they have. So if you look at the kind of the material that was produced by the far right 10 years plus ago, it was very stodgy, staid, aimed at an older audience. The far right messaging now is far more in sync with what young people would want to consume, the kind of the meme trolling sort of stuff that that is prevalent on the internet. So I would say to parents who are concerned, and I've got teenage kids myself, is the single thing that you can do is be involved in your children's online lives and discuss it. Discuss what's out there. And to give you, I think, a flavour for the demand to know more, is we put an event on just over a month ago. It was a virtual event, and it was around cyber, and there was two themes to it. The first was to equip teachers, parents with the technical skills they needed to protect their children, and the second bit was to give them a sense of some of the material out there and some of the techniques that groomers were using across the ideological spectrum. We were absolutely inundated with requests. And we had over 600 people dial in, and our learning from that is there is a real demand, and we're going to keep putting these events on and evolving them as the threat changes.
So is there a specific phone number? Is there an email address? How does anybody concerned, contact Prevent, to start a conversation with you?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, your local team, are they reachable?
Yep. So the team, we've got a team based at Spinney Hill, as you know, and you can contact us via 101. If you are looking for a website, go to Act Early, Act Early UK, and that will take you to a website which has all the information around Prevent. It's got case studies. It's got the signs of potential radicalisation that we're looking for, and it will tell you can make an online referral, just as you referred to, because we recognise that people's default nowadays tends to be to look for an online information. So we standardise that at a national level. But if you ring 101 and has to be put through the Prevent team, if there's no one there, you'll get a call back.
And there was two things that caught my ear. One, you talked about mentors.
Yep.
Tell us a bit more about who those mentors are. Because it's about trusting those mentors. Are they the right people to be working with vulnerable? So tell us about who they are and how the community can get involved.
Okay.
And then you talked about money. How can the community or grassroots, tap into some of that money to work with you or work, on their own to prevent some of the stuff you're talking about?
Okay, so the mentors, their official title is intervention providers, IPs. You'll hear me kind of refer to them as. It's a Home Office scheme. They're recruited by the Home Office. it is quite an intense process to be selected. So if you are someone who wants to be a religious mentor, if you are a Muslim, expect to be interviewed by an imam who's perhaps got experience in prisons and who will test the rigor of your knowledge. There's no point me doing it because I'm not going to have that depth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Some of our most compelling mentors are people who have been former extremists on one side or the other. So I know very well a man who used to fight for the Taliban.
Okay.
And now is a Home Office mentor, and you can imagine how effective he is because he's lived it, he's walked it, and I think the compelling thing is he still feels as committed about the grievances he was pursuing, but he recognises there are different ways to pursue it.
Yeah.
So these are not people who have been brainwashed and turned around, but they're people who have lived a life to a certain extent, become disillusioned and recognise that perhaps they've been manipulated and withdrawn from it, and are now trying to put something positive back into it. And I've worked with EDL members who again have been on a real journey and see that they were groomed and dragged into an organisation which they recognised didn't have their interests, their community's interests at heart.
I mean, thanks for your very in-depth and very articulate, explanation of Prevent. And you've done some myth busting in your, in your accounts there. It's not targeted at any specific one group. And, it's not a intelligence gathering exercise, as you explained, counterterrorism or, dealing with those sort of things has 4 different strands, and you fit in as one, strand to protect vulnerable people and stop them from going, down a certain route. But I just want to talk about you and, your former role as the neighborhood policing commander for East area. Tell me, what were some of the highlights, for you when you were the commander of this area, working in this, in the diverse communities?
Okay, well, it'd probably sound odd to non-police ears, but I think you'll understand it. I think one of the highlights for me, and it was how the community responded to it, and how integral policing and communities working together was the 2 EDL visits that we had in 2010 and 2012, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a massive policing operation to contain that threat, because we really didn't know we were going to be faced. It was the biggest street movement that Europe had seen, I think, for 20 years or something like that. So there was a significant public order operation, and we were really worried that we would see conflict between communities, particularly young Muslims engaging with the protest group, and we were worried that we would see, similar to we saw in the towns in the northwest, in the noughties, almost a generation criminalised by getting drawn into that conflict. And we did lots of engagement with schools, with young people. We recruited community champions who could be out there on the street and be the buffer between ourselves and young people who were angry and concerned about this intrusion. And although the upset caused by that was significant, but we didn't see the whole scale disorder that we were expecting. And what we didn't see was young people criminalised for no reason. And the other thing, the big step change we did was we embraced social media. Yeah, we had a helpline set up for people who were concerned about action. People were worried that mosques were going to be attacked, and we set up a myth-busting phone line and staffed it up for 3 days. It got about 3 calls, whereas Twitter just blew up, and we were able to effectively communicate. And it was the moment we went from almost playing with Twitter to suddenly it becoming an indispensable tool.
It feels like some people live in this virtual space and their lives take place in that virtual space. But you mentioned a word that caught my ear there, mosques. And you and I have had conversations offline a while ago about the security of mosques, and Home Office funding to make mosques, more secure. And I remember addressing imams recently, and we talked about this. And my understanding is that from Leicestershire and Rutland, none of the mosques have been successful in getting this Home Office funding to make their place of worship safer. How can you, support these mosques in that application process, or have you got any tips or guidance for them?
Okay, now this might sound cold comfort, but in some ways there should be some satisfaction drawn by that, because I'm looking for wood to touch here, but we don't have some of the experiences that mosques in more isolated areas do. So I'm thinking of some of the challenges in cities where there are smaller Muslim communities, where new mosques are established and they become the focus for protest. Thankfully, we haven't got that. Yakub, you might be able to tell me more recently about damage to mosques here, but I think they're relatively low level. They are. So I do appreciate the frustration that you see an advert come out for apply for this, and then you get nothing. It can be frustrating.
And that's the feedback I had from an imam. We saw the advert, we applied for the funding, and we weren't successful. But as you say, the Holy Grail, or is that mosques in general haven't been targets in Leicester. In general, they haven't been criminalised or vandalised. And, on the one occasion that I'm aware of that a mosque was broken into, we actually arrested somebody and had a successful prosecution. Right. So, it's not something I'm overly concerned about. It's something I wanted to raise with you. Now, earlier on, I had a text message from Zune Dasu. And this is more for me, but, feel free to chip in, who asked me a question about knife crime. That was in the media, in particular around Leicester, that they saw, in one of the local medias. I just wanted to say, as the East Area Commander, and I just wanted to reassure the communities of East Leicester, is that the incidents that were referred to in that short period of time, I think there may have been 3 or 4. They were, only one of those was on the east of Leicester. The others were elsewhere, which doesn't make it any better. But the important message for me I wanted to get across is that none of them were linked to one another. So they were not related to any community tensions or any underlying issues that crossed over geographical boundaries. These were incidents in isolation. In relation to the one in East Leicester, I just wanted to, assure our community that I do have a serious violence and knife crime strategy locally that has 2 strands to it. One is proactive, policing, a response to those who are carrying weapons, who are involved in that sort of criminality, or who have got a propensity to, to go down that route, and that is targeted policing. And where the grounds exist, we will be stop and searching those. We will be trying to, close the intelligence gap, in relation to the activities. But those who are on the periphery and those who are up and coming, we have, I have one of my officers, Ben Broad, I have a PCSO, Gemma Burt, their remit is to visit these mostly young people at home with their parents and just try to understand, the why, and importantly to understand, who the right people would be to help these young people, to try and divert them. Our attention and effort with them is constant. So, with those who are already, involved, we have a proactive policing response to them. For those who are up and coming, like I said, we do school visits, and, you'll be interested to know that some of the mosques and madrasas have reached out and they've asked for PC Ben Broad and Gemma Bird to visit, community centres and mosques and madrasas to work with some of the young children. So I'm excited, by that and that relationship and that offer. But the other thing is, and this is an appeal to, mothers, sisters, brothers, and, community members out there, as we've seen in other parts of the country, those who are up and coming, those who are potentially involved in this sort of behaviour, somebody within the family or the community, knows about this. And I think we have a certain relationship now, or I'm hoping to build that relationship where, I'm hoping that you can reach in. It's not about grassing anybody. It's about protecting you. It's about protecting those young people, the families and the communities. Before something serious happens, let's, work together in partnership, families, police and others, to try and prevent those. So I have got, a written plan which my officers and staff are engaged in daily. I just wanted to reassure you that we are extremely busy in that regard. But then, we heard Bill talk about community champions, and that's always been, a strength of East Leicester, where community folk have worked well with the police. And recently, and you may have heard me talk in other platforms about something called the Neighbourhood Active. in a nutshell, these are volunteers from our communities. The pilots for Neighbourhood Active are the Highfield, St. Peter's area, St. Matthews, and a pilot out the Lutterworth. These are community volunteers who have been vetted by the police, who have been trained by us, to deal with and to reach the communities in certain circumstances. I'm talking mental health, domestic violence, antisocial behaviour, and that sort of stuff. So the Neighbourhood Active, personnel and volunteers will be out in the community trying to break barriers, trying to build bridges. So if you do see them out there wearing the Neighbourhood Active jackets, please engage them. They are working with us. They are your eyes and ears in the ground. Somebody talked about not being able to reach us via 101. Neighbourhood Active is another platform through which you can, you reach us. Bill, as a former commander, you heard me talk about the two strands: proactive policing in relation to serious crime and knife crime, and the preventative side. Give me your thoughts on what else I should be doing with our communities to keep them safer.
I think the proactive element is always important. The ability to tackle those causing the most harm. Yeah. But if you think about our model of policing, since the days of Sir Robert Peel, it's always been about preventative. Yeah. And for that, we need the confidence, the trust of communities to reach out and give that support and that information. Yeah. Because without it, it's going to fail. Our model is based on consent and prevention. Yeah. And it's about confidence and trust in us. There's so many ways in which you can reach us. There's Crime Stoppers, through which you can do things anonymously. You can invite your local PCSO round to your house for a cup of tea or whatever and have that conversation. I'm hoping to build stronger relationships where we can talk to one another about meaningful, things to safeguard the most vulnerable in our communities. One last thing before I go, Bill, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming out, because it's important to hear firsthand from the community about what Prevent is and the myth busting you've done. I just wanted to give Neighbourhood Link a quick plug, if I can, before I wrap up. And Neighbourhood Link is a virtual platform where I ask people in East Leicester to register, because through Neighbourhood Link you can tell me what matters to you locally. You can do surveys on there which takes less than 60 seconds, but also on there you can tell me what matters to you locally. In the absence of you telling me what's important to you, what happens is I go to the data. The data takes me to crime, knife crime, drugs, burglary, or whatever it is, and then I focus there as my priorities. But to you locally in your postcodes, it might be something like antisocial behaviour. It might be parking problems. It might be littering. If I don't know about those things that matter to you, they do not become priorities for me. So what I suggest is use Neighbourhood Link. Register on Neighbourhood Link. We create a relationship there. On a weekly basis, I will give you updates in relation to what we're doing in our local communities. But also, it's where you can hold me to account. You can send me messages on Neighbourhood Link and tell me you said X, Y, and Z, and you haven't delivered yet, or where I should be focusing my attention. That's it from me today. I've had a couple more questions on there, which I'll try and take before we close. The first one is the service confidential, and can it be done anonymously? Crime Stoppers is definitely, anonymous and done confidentially. But in relation to Neighbourhood Link, I'm not asking you to share sensitive, delicate matters to, just tell me what's important to you. Tell me what's affecting you locally. That way I can focus my attention there. Question there, are FMO still your partners, and do you think they represent the community, and do the police work or part of the Knife Crime Commission? Important questions, and hopefully in the next talk show that I do with you, which I think is planned for next week, Wednesday, or the Wednesday after that, I will hopefully answer that. I'm just conscious of time. I just want to thank Bill for his time today, and thank our listeners for listening. On that note, I wish you all a blessed